Okay, so this time I'm going to be doing the article I wrote on arguing from the extremes. As before, I'll put the link to the original article that I published on the Free Thinking Ministries website up if you want to go read that. And again, I try to make these a bit more easygoing, but I just kind of tend to end up reading the same thing I've written, so we'll just see how it goes. So this is arguing from the extremes. It's a very common type of fallacious reasonings and fallacious reasoning that I've seen everywhere, and that's the term I've chosen to describe it. And once you see it, you're just going to see, well, this is everywhere, especially in political discourse. And roughly speaking, it's the idea that one or an extremely small number of counterexamples will disprove a whole theory. And this is simply just not how you do good reasoning or good thinking about anything at all. Go ask a scientist if, hey, if you see X follow Y 1,000 times, you're going to conclude that there's, some type of a causal link between X and Y. But if on try 1,001 X doesn't follow, aha, then I've got you. The whole theory needs to be thrown out. Well, a scientist who's any good is going to tell you, no, absolutely not, that's dumb. Because the fact that it didn't work on time 1,001 should probably give you some amount of pause, but it should, well, there's something going on there at least. But it shouldn't prompt you to conclude that the whole established theory, which was in this case X follows Y, just needs to be thrown out completely. That's stupid, but a lot of people do reason this way. And before fans of David Hume come after me, yes, I know Hume claimed exactly this, but Hume was a fool who admitted in his writing even he couldn't live up to the standard of this, that induction is invalid. He lived as if induction is valid because there's nothing wrong with induction, and Hume was a fool. And I'll stand by that. So, by example, to help explain this, it's been widely demonstrated in social science data that children with both a mother and a father present in the home tend to do better in life. The fallacious example of arguing from the extremes would be if you said, well, this simply cannot be true because, say, a person who was raised by both a mother and a father who turned out to be a con artist, and you also know a man raised by a single mother who founded and runs a multi-million-dollar company. Now, this is a fallacious objection because what you're doing is treating the theory as if it's a deductive argument. Theories are not deductive arguments. One genuine counterexample proves that there's something wrong with a deductive argument, but theories are much more akin to inductive arguments, which again is why David Hume was a fool for rejecting them, wherein what they do is they say what's more likely to be true, or what's true more often than not. As Nicholas Rescher said, our acceptance policy should be based on considerations of overall best fit, where the fit at issue is one of consonance and coordination with our prevailing commitments, which is just a fancier way of saying exactly what I just said above. So going back to that example, if I argue that it's far more often than not, it's better for a child to be raised by both a mother and a father, a few counterexamples do not in any way undermine that argument. Or, for another example, the existence of seemingly genuinely intersex people does not undermine a theory of gender that says human beings are male and female, because, again, that's an inductive theory that's explaining the best explanation of the available data. You should expect there to be some things in the data that don't quite fit. Now, to carry this further, estimates of the number of people who claim to be transgender vary, but they seem to fall between a high of 0.7% and a low of 0.39%. And I did get that from a study that was published back in 2019, so that was 8 years ago. So hey, maybe the number's gone up a bit or gone down a bit, but it still probably hasn't gone up to something that would warrant that, and hey, we need to redo this whole thing like, say, 10, 15, or 20%. And that's even assuming that all the reported instances of transgenderism are accurate. That is, none of the people involved are confused, lying, suffering from mental problems, or things like that, which is almost certainly the case with some of them. So this gives us a better than 99% correlation between biological sex and claimed gender. If the correlation were this high for anything else, we just call people insane and stupid for challenging it. And yet, again, this is only the amount of people who are making the trans claim, that is, people who claim to be transgender. The number of actually intersex people is significantly smaller than the people who make this claim. Now, reasonable people can disagree about how big the number would need to be before it's a genuine challenge. Like I just threw out, say, 10, 15, or 20%. Maybe somebody's like, no, it needs to be 30, so maybe somebody else would say 5% is enough, and we could debate that. But it definitely needs to be higher than 1% before it's a genuine challenge. Nonetheless, many people will make this fallacious appeal and claim that things like we need to throw out the traditional and historical understanding of human beings as male and female because, hey, some people claim transgender and there are seemingly genuine cases of intersex people, therefore the whole theory needs to be thrown out. No, that's not how you evaluate theories. That's a very bad way of thinking. An anomaly or error factor of less than 1% simply does not establish that. This is just bad reasoning, as the good philosopher Timothy McGrew illustrates with an example from the Philosophy of Science, and I quote him here. This point tells against a naive form of falsificationism according to which even the slightest mismatch between theory and evidence suffices to overturn a theory. But it is a grave exaggeration to claim, as some social constructivists have done, that the existence of an interpretive dimension to scientific inference undermines the objectivity of science. And he's talking about philosophy of science there, of course, but again, he's making the exact same point I'm making, just in more technical language. So, carrying this example more, no reasonable or serious thinker or person would or should ever attempt to argue that because children are born with birth defects, such as, say, missing limbs, we should then conclude that it's normal, fine, or even good for a person to have missing limbs. Likewise, it does not follow that because there are some people who are born seemingly genuinely intersex, that this is a normal or good thing. And once you see this, or once you're looking for it, this type of bad reasoning is just everywhere in our society. So, someone proposes a new law, system, or idea that will help people or address a problem. Then opponents do an analysis of it and they find out that it will ignore or even hurt a small amount of people. The opponents then claim that this whole thing is just a terrible idea because it will hurt a small amount of people. But the thing is, virtually everything that human societies do will ignore or hurt a small amount of people. That's just the reality of life. There are always trade-offs. You do something good for one person, it means you don't have the resources to do something good for that person. By example, I use the VA healthcare system because I was in the Army. Now, reworking the VA likely would cause problems for me and other veterans. But if you do it right, it might also cause it to run better and more effectively in the long run. Now, this balance of problems versus effectiveness, that's an empirical question that, at least in theory, can be answered. Now, it's a complicated one, so maybe we couldn't get a good answer, but at least in theory it can be answered. But I'd say it's quite likely that even if on balance in the long run reworking the VA would be a good thing, it would still cause problems for me and other veterans initially as those changes were implemented. It doesn't follow from the fact that it would cause problems for me and other veterans that we shouldn't do that. Perhaps the good of the reworking will outweigh those problems. And that's what you need to consider. That's thinking holistically and smartly about these things instead of doing this fallacy of arguing from the extremes. And people do this all the time with many other things, like people do this all the time with abortion as well. What they do there is, and people on both sides will do this, they point to very rare and extreme examples to justify their positions. And this is done because those examples are so extreme that they then invoke emotional responses that cloud judgment and make it harder to see the error. So you'll have pro-choice proponents point to the example of, hey, this 12 or 13-year-old girl got raped by someone in her family, and you're going to force her to have that baby? Or you'll have pro-life people point to an example of, like, hey, this abortion doctor did them very, very badly, and look how many women died because of what happened. Now, those are both extreme examples that are intended to invoke emotion and cloak your ability to actually think about, well, what does a typical abortion actually look like, and why is that bad or not, and actually think about it rationally. You often see anti-war protesters do the same thing, and there wasn't a war with Iran going on when I initially wrote this, but there is now, so you're going to see people do the same thing. What they'll do is they will find an emotionally heartbreaking example of a civilian, often a child, who was killed in the fighting, and then they're going to start harping on about how the whole war is terrible. Well, as somebody who's actually been in wars, even though I was a comms guy, so it's not like I did fighting, but I was there in a war, I'll tell you, war is terrible. But depending on who is fighting and why, peace might actually be worse. Further, let's just ask some reasonable questions. Were the civilians being deliberately targeted? Did the military forces act negligently? Or is, say, the civilian's death a rare thing and reasonable steps were taken to avoid it, and it's something that just happened because in war, people die? Well, now, if it's the latter, this is an example of arguing from the extreme. Conversely, if, like, the military forces are doing things like deliberately targeting the power grid and civilians, that's a different example entirely. So, point is here, it's arguing from the extremes, or just naive and stupid reasoning to argue, hey, some civilians and children have died, therefore the whole war has to be abandoned. Sometimes, but not always, I have actually run into young Earth creationists who'll do this too. What they'll do is they'll point to the rare instances where a dating method like, say, carbon-14 gave odd, contradictory, or clearly false results, because that does happen. And then they'll argue, well, we've got to throw the whole thing out, the whole method must be flawed. But this is the same type of bad reasoning, because they're deliberately well, maybe not deliberately, maybe they just don't know any better, but it's ignoring all the other times that dating method, like carbon-14, actually worked and why it's generally trusted. If something works 99 out of 1,000 times, that's astonishing. Now, I don't have the numbers for accuracy of carbon-14 available for me off the top of my head. I'm sure we could look it up. But I really doubt it's 100%, because virtually nothing humans do works 100% of the time. So that's the point. If you have a theory or idea that has met a fairly high standard, say, for example, here it works 99 out of 1,000 times, and then someone comes along and they don't like their idea and they start harping on and whining about that 1 out of 1,000, saying, see, this proves the whole thing doesn't work. No, it doesn't. That's arguing from the extremes. It's stupid reasoning. That person's arguing a la David Hume that induction is invalid. It's not. This is a good way of thinking about things. Almost nothing human beings do works 100% out of the time. An error factor of 1 out of 1,000 is astonishingly good. You get something that good, bet all your money on that all the time, every time. I certainly would. Otherwise, it's arguing from the extremes and it's stupid reasoning. And it's often covered up by highly provocative and emotional examples when people do that. So watch out for people doing this and don't do it yourself.